With it being October, we're reviewing all of the Awakened mode tanks that I own, so you know which ones to get for yourself. We're 2 down and many more to go, and today we're looking at the Gorynych KV-5. This time around we're looking at a tank with preferential matchmaking. Unlike the anti-pref of the Lycan, this tank has regular preferential matchmaking, meaning it has +1, -2. With this tank being a premium tier 8 Russian heavy tank, that means it will never see tier 10, which is very valuable nowadays. So definitely take this into account as we break down the statistics and when deciding which tanks to get this month. We begin as usual with taking a look at that Gorynich's gun. It's a 107mm that deals 300 alpha damage. With the reload being a base 8.2 seconds, that gives it a DPM of 2196 with that 300 damage, which is well above average and near the top of its class even against non-prefs. That's very nice, but what makes pref tanks pref are usually their penetration values. Despite some of them being buffed in the last year, the KV-5 is not one of those, and sports the worst standard pen for tier 8 heavies at 175 standard AP penetration with only 830 shell speed. And the premium is not that much better, being 219 premium APCR penetration with 1038 shell speed. Definitely taking full pramo with this one. And even loading that premium, you're basically using a round with as much standard penetration on many other tier 8 heavies, and even still not as good as many others too for their standard. So that's a pretty tough downside for your preferential matchmaking, but trust me, it's not that bad as it seems. Not seeing tier 10s is well worth it. As for the gun handling, it has a rough 0.4 accuracy, but pretty good accuracy during rotation that keeps it quite aimed while moving regardless. It's honestly not that bad. And if it is for you, well, vert stabs will be very helpful. Its aim time is a pretty average 2.3 seconds, and it even has a pretty workable 7 degrees of gun depression. It is a solid gun for a pref tank, and it's identical to its counterpart, the unskinned KV-5. Yes, this tank's counterpart is also a premium tank, but it's a skinned premium with no differences. And before anyone mentions the Minotaur KV-5, that thing doesn't have preferential matchmaking and different alpha values, with bad DPM and up armored. So it's a different vehicle respectfully. But yes, back to the Gorynych. Its armor profile is quite nice. It's got a very strong 240mm mantlet and surrounding frontal faceplate, and a curved bulge of 230mm surrounding that mantlet. The lower and upper plates are strong and angled, 180mm, with a 205mm beak connecting them. So don't shoot the lower plate, because the weaknesses on this tank are much easier than those plates. Instead, you want to shoot at the cupola, or these raised machine gun ports and driver ports. The cupola is 190mm directly on, and 170mm the rest of the way around. So it's still quite strong too, but it's much flatter than those upper and lower plates, at least when hitting the center. The raised ports, or R2-D2s as we call them, have 180mm of the face of the small one on the right side, and 170mm the rest of the way around. And the large one is also 170 all the way around, except for right where the machine gun is being only 160. So shoot the bigger one and try hitting where the machine gun is for the weakest part. These are curved and hitting on the edges will bounce, so you do have to hit near the center wherever you're looking at it from, which is easier said than done sometimes when the tank is turning or rocking back and forth to make the shot harder to hit. If this tank is side scraping though, you will have a hard time penning. And it's pretty easy not to over angle with this tank as it's very forgiving and has a whopping 150mm side armor. Side scraping off the left side of this tank, you only give the smaller R2-D2 away if you over peek. And that side of the tank is where the cupola is for them to pen instead. But when you side scrape off the right side and don't give up your right side R2-D2, you don't give away any cupolas on your turret. As long as you don't over angle, that is a very strong position to be in. It's a very strong tank, and even when aiming at its side directly, make sure to shoot between the track armor to not have the 20mm tracks eat your shell, especially if you're shooting heat. Even the side and rear of the turret are extremely strong, with 180mm around the whole turret. The rear end of the tank is also pretty strong, with 140mm on the lower end and 90mm on the top. So shoot high on the rear and shoot between the tracks on the sides because they're weaker than the sides of the turret. This is one of the best armored tanks in the game in my opinion, especially taking into consideration its preferential matchmaking, meaning it will never see tier 10 penetration values. Not to mention, it has 1780 HP to utilize, which is the highest of the tier 8 heavies, even including the German and Japanese super heavies. Getting that armor to the front line will take a moment, as this tank is quite slow. It does have a top speed of 40, which is fairly decent for a heavy tank, but even with its large 1200 horsepower, its weight slows it down significantly, giving it a power to weight ratio of only 11.98. So going uphill is especially slow in this thing too. It's definitely not as bad as a British heavy or a German super heavy, and it's ultimately pretty good given its armor profile. It's not turning fast either, but the side armor helps when being spun around by light tanks and such. And you're going to want to use your speed to its fullest to get to that front line, because you have very bad view range at 350 meters. That's the worst it gets for tier 8 heavies, matching many other Russian tanks for that view range, and its camo is pretty awful too, which is typical for heavies, right? But with its size, it's particularly awful. Again, like most of these initial Awakened mode tanks, it technically has better camo than the unskinned KV-5, but that's because it comes with camo pre-equipped, and you can't put any camo on yourself. Brawling scenarios are where you excel in anyway, so leave the sniping to the TDs and mediums. Not to say you can't do it and hit your shots, but you're going to be outspotted and picked apart by tank destroyers and the such. Overall, the Gorynych KV-5 is a damn good tank in my opinion, with really good armor and HP, a solid gun with good DPM, solid depression, but lackluster penetration, and all of that never seeing a tier 10 ever. It's a great pickup, and despite it being a skinned version of a tank, I would recommend this tank being the version of the KV-5 you should have. Not only because you get free camo out of it, but because of its Awakened mode participation. Why have the KV-5 when you can have the Gorynych that's exactly the same, and it plays in an annual event mode? When this tank awakens for that event mode, it becomes one of the solid choices within it. It was the first flamethrower tank we technically had in the game, with one of its rounds being a Dragon's Breath type of round that spews fire at tanks that can also easily set them on fire too. But it also gets another shell type that arcs like an artillery round and does big splash damage for covering distance, as the flamethrower is quite close quarters. And not only does it have those two rounds, but it has a passive ability to regenerate HP over the course of the battle, allowing you to heal between fights, which comes in handy and keeps you on the battlefield for longer than others. This is usually one of the last tanks alive, alongside the hiding Revenants and respawning Infernos. Despite how nice that sounds, this tank does feel like a pretty basic experience within a very fun and interesting mode, so it's not that exciting, nor do I highly recommend picking it up for the Awakened mode abilities alone. I will be showcasing all of these tanks' Awakened mode abilities in a stream here on YouTube on Halloween, and if you happen to miss out on that, the VOD will be saved in my live section for you to view afterwards. So, a very strong tank in multiplayer battles with preferential matchmaking, but identical to a tank that you may already have, being the KV-5. However, if you don't have that KV-5, I would highly recommend picking up this tank for its standard mode power alone. But if you do have a KV-5, then I would not prioritize this tank from the Awakened mode roster, as its ability in the Awakened mode is kind of basic and less interesting than many others that I would recommend above this one. And before we get into my standard battle gameplay, let's go over what I'm running on this tank. Equipment wise, I have optics, loader, and vents, but if you're having an issue with its accuracy, you can swap out the optics for vert stabs, as the optics isn't as effective with just 350 meters view range. But I like to run optics for being able to spot when need be, and to do my best at punishing sneaking as much as I can. Consumables are my usual premium repair kit, food rations, and standard medkit, because I can, and for my skills we have a typical heavy tank setup that I use of 6th Sense, rapid loading, steady aim, running gun, snapshot, born leader, situational awareness, controlled impact, and supply conservation. If you feel like you're not getting much use out of the controlled impact, you could swap it for repairs or even off-road driving to better those terrain resistances and get more out of your horsepower. With that said, let's get into the gameplay. And we're on Malinovka for this one, which is quite surprising, seeing as I'm a 7 degrees of gun depression slow heavy tank. We're still going to have a very good game. Of course, I'm going to go hill. This map has been problematic for me as of late, and as of late I mean since 6.0 I would say, with the whole iced over identity of the snow variant of this map. Some heavy tanks would opt to go bottom left. However, no matter what side I spawn on, if I go bottom left, and I brawl whatever other heavies decided to do that on the enemy team, I then have to walk out in the open in a death valley on both sides, in my opinion. And so, no matter what heavy I'm in, I like to go hill. It is map control, when you win it, going down it is actually safer than walking out of the fields on the bottom left, in my opinion. And there's no artillery this game, so I don't have anything really to be afraid of. Luckily, too, I have quite a handful of heavy tanks coming with me. And despite me saying in the video, my speed is, yes, not helpful. But that's okay. It doesn't matter how quickly we get there. As long as we make a presence on the hill, then we can at least say we tried, right? We end up losing. Meanwhile, they have a heavy tank seemingly sniping in D6, getting outspotted, but our light tank's dead. No matter, we don't need a light tank when we're up on the hill. Now, when we come off of it, we're going to, but... First tank spotted up on the hill is a very scary Emil 1951. A tank with very good gun depression, very good armor when using that gun depression, and an autoloader. Now, if he pens me quite often, I could be too clipped, right? But our T-34-3 is actually getting hits into him, so he's not utilizing his armor to his best. And only now, after 2 minutes into the battle, can we say we finally arrived at our play space. We're going to be up on the hill for most of this game. And that's because the enemy team actually sent quite a good number of tanks here as well. So it's not a pushover hill fight that I usually have. You either have the team that doesn't go here or the team that does. We low roll the Emil. It's by only hitting for 245. And even though we just penned his side, we don't pen it again. He does get a pen off into us, but there we go. There's a pen side for the exact same roll of 245. How interesting is that? Progetto doesn't know where to shoot us. We're going to wiggle. You're going to see me constantly pull back, look to the right. 180 millimeter side turret is at an angle I feel like is better than 240 flat. So, like, doing a little jerk, right, also screws up their shot on your cupola if they're aiming at it and whatnot. Now we have a bottom, or not a bottom tier, but a AMX M445, which did get an armor buff, but we were able to go through his upper plate, luckily, with our seemingly standard amount of penetration. It is orange, though, and we're not going to pen that one. See it bounce. We somehow missed that Minuteman shot, but it's okay. We have good DPM. You see how we're just expending rounds here? We've taken quite a handful of damage, but now that Progetto's shooting HE at us, and hopefully he stops that. This IS-2M, luckily we can go through his upper plate. He's gonna aim at us, aim at us, aim at us. He has got a big hard-hitting gun. We pen another one near his turret ring. AMX M4, I do want to get rid of him. He's seemingly the scariest tank for me right now. I'm trying to get cupola shots on him. I can't. IS-3, or IS-2M, sorry, bounces me. And this is just kind of the brawl you do. I am missing shots, and vert stabs would be very helpful here, but it doesn't matter. Look how quick we reload. If I miss one shot, there we go. We put in another one. Turning there actually screwed me over. But, man, that armor buff that they gave to the AMX M445 is really shining, isn't it? Or is it just my lack of premium penetration? Either way, we're still going to go through his face. We're still going to DPM him, hopefully. Go for the more damaging shot on the IS-2M. We're at 3,000 damage now. We took 2 minutes to get up here, and we spent 2 minutes brawling. And we've had 1,900 block damage, so we've blocked more than HP than we have. And finally, we got rid of the tank that was penning us the most, the AMX M445. And we've won the hill, right? We're putting them on the back line. I try and shoot the side of the Progetto. I somehow damage a module, but there we go. We finally got a pen. Many shots in this replay, too. I can safely say I would have gotten damage if I had more penetration. Now, the FCM50T and the SDA2 are both preferential tanks, and they have buffed their penetration values to be basically non-pref. So if this tank ever got that treatment, I would honestly say it would be way too strong than it already is. It is a very strong tank, very accurate, despite having 0.4. You can see how small my reticle gets even at distance here. And that DPM is just great. And you lose that DPM with the Minotaur as well as Pref. So, like, why would you get the Minotaur? And with that, we pop over 5k damage. We've blocked more damage than our HP. We've actually gotten some assisted. And 5 kills. We don't get a top gun here, but that was a pretty good game. And that was a pretty good brawl. You rarely get those nowadays. Wish I would have aimed that one better, because that would have been my top gun. But That's the power of the Gornich. You take it to a spot and you brawl out. And you don't have to worry about tier 10s, which means you won't see Averys, Tyrans, big guns with big HP to take from you, or big alpha damage to take away from you. And with that, we did 2247 base XP. Pretty high, pretty high. Of course, that is going to be an ace tanker, but it's just a very strong tank. And even though it took us a long time to get to the hill, it didn't take us a long time to get 5,000 damage. And so I do recommend this vehicle. Preferential matchmaking alone is very strong. But if you have the KV-5, like I said, maybe wait to pick it up if it's your last one for the Halloween tanks, as its event mode abilities aren't really that cool or interesting. But if you like the sound of it, of course, pick it up. If you don't have a KV-5, I highly recommend getting the Gornich. It's a good pick in both modes, and it'll do you very well. That being said, though, thank you for watching my review on the Gornich. I hope to see you guys in my later reviews for all these Halloween mode tanks, and take care.